right, good morning. We are going to continue on. This is actually the chapter 15 portion of this little combo unit. So we're going to look at Charles Darwin and some of his discoveries. And we're going to look at the principles of natural selection that he proposed and how that could actually change a population. Now, Charles Darwin, he is most known for his book, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But he actually began his research on a 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle. So we got a couple pictures there of that. He was mostly employed as what we call a naturalist, which is kind of a old-timey term for a biologist, but I think he was also the ship's doctor. But this voyage was making a ton of stops along the South American coastline. He made extensive collections and observations of plants and animals, and a large portion of the organisms that he collected in his journey are actually still preserved in their original casings at the British Museum in London, which I have been to. If you ever have the chance to go, I highly recommend it. It was the coolest place I ever went when I did that. I did a semester abroad when I was in college. But it's amazing that, some 200 years later that his collections are still basically in the exact same condition that they were collected in. But one of the things that he is most known for is his research that he did on the Galapagos Islands. And it was here that he started developing his views on evolution by looking at very set species. So giant land tortoises, marine iguanas, mockingbirds, and ground finches, which a lot of people associate him with the birds, but he did do a lot of observations with the two that are listed here. He returned to England in 1836, but it took him over a decade to actually get his book published. The long version of it is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. The short version of that is just Origin of Species. And this is, like I said, this is what he is most known for. I have a copy of this in my classroom that is full of his original drawings that he did while he was, out doing all this stuff. Because obviously they didn't have cameras. So if you were a biologist or you were a scientist of any kind of measure, you also had to be a really good artist because you had to adequately share with others what you were doing. And so a lot of these, like I said, a lot of these scientists were really, really talented artists, or they commissioned someone to actually do that for them. But when we look at the term evolution, and I love this picture, this is a riff off of a very famous painting, but we're not just talking about humans. We're talking about just evolution in general. So the cumulative changes in groups of organisms over time. So changes could be brain capacity, walking upright, using tools. It depends on what species you're actually looking at. So the other thing that Darwin is most known for, besides his ideas of evolution, was his idea of natural selection, which actually has 4 separate points. So natural selection is based on 4 ideas. So overproduction, variation, heritability, and reproductive advantage. Now, typically populations produce more offspring than can survive, so it goes into this idea where only the strong survive. The individuals that are most suited to their way of life are going to be the ones to reproduce and produce viable offspring. Variation talks about the individual differences within a population. So if we looked at the variation in just a classroom, we have variation in height, eye color, hair color, body size, build. All of that is variation, even though we all are still considered Homo sapiens. Heritability, which we have kind of talked about that when we did our genetics chapters, but it basically says that variations are inherited from parents. So it doesn't really need a lot of other explanation. And then the last one is reproductive advantage. Now, when we talk a little bit more about some of these later topics further on, there are situations where some variations allowed an organism to have more offspring than others. So it made, like I said, it made them more suitable to their environment, and thus they were more likely to be the ones to survive to reproduce. This kind of goes along with something we did with the last chapter when we talked about the selective breeding. That actually gets into a whole nother field that we call artificial selection. So it's another term for selective breeding when we look at organisms that are bred for certain traits in order to produce offspring with those traits. So again, the designer dogs, so the breeding of purebreds to get something new, so like a Labrador Retriever and a Poodle, you get the Golden Doodle, or you get a Labradoodle. So this is really common when they're developing these new designer breeds or new strains of crop plants. So you'll see crosses between different kinds of vegetables to create something new, or new kinds of fruit to create something. The picture that's up here, this is my little breed of dog. I have a little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. She's love of my life, my little baby girl. But one of the breeds that has come about in recent years is actually to blend them with a beagle, so we end up with a beagle ear. They've also been bred with Bichon Frise, and you get a Cavachon, and lots of these, like I said, lots of designer breed type dogs. Even a Puggle, like a pug and a beagle, would consider in this category as well. This is it for today. So another little short video and another little short assignment. This is going to be the way of it this week, because we want to be sure that we get through all this material before we have to take our EOC. So again, if you have any issues, you have any questions, please contact me, and I will talk to you guys later.